What happens when cinema dares to defy fear itself? The 1970s was not just a decade of rebellion, but of artistic firestorms that tested every law and every limit. Directors challenged religion, politics, and even morality itself, creating films so fearless they were banned, censored, or forgotten. Yet today, they can be streamed online, waiting to remind us how bold the world once was when cinema had no leash. Number 15. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. When Stanley Kubrick unleashed A Clockwork, Orange audiences did not know whether to applaud or riot. Based on Anthony Burgess's novel, it followed Alex DeLarge, a young man addicted to ultraviolence, and Beethoven in a decaying dystopian Britain. The film struck nerves worldwide with its hypnotic visuals and its merciless dissection of free will. Critics called it genius. Governments called it dangerous. In Britain, it became a national scandal. Copycat crimes were blamed on it. Parents wrote letters to Parliament demanding it be banned. Kubrick himself withdrew it from circulation, fearing for his family's safety after receiving threats. Yet abroad, it thrived, becoming a cult totem for freedom of choice and the corruption of control. Behind the scenes, the production was as chaotic as its story. Malcolm McDowell suffered a scratched cornea during the famous conditioning scene and nearly drowned during another. Kubrick's perfectionism drove the cast to exhaustion, but also created some of the most haunting images in film history. Decades later, the movie returned to the UK uncut. Critics hailed it as prophetic, a mirror of society's hunger for control disguised as morality. Watching it today feels like stepping into a nightmare that predicted the future, a world where the state decides what humanity should feel. Number 14. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. When Bernardo Bertolucci released Last Tango in Paris, it shattered every boundary of cinema's emotional language. Set in Paris, it told the story of two strangers, one grieving a dead wife, the other seeking escape, who engage in a raw, anonymous relationship, stripped of names and meaning. The world had never seen vulnerability filmed so close, so real, so painful. But the firestorm was instant. Censors in Italy banned it, governments in Chile and Portugal outlawed it, religious groups called it blasphemous. Even Hollywood distanced itself. Marlon Brando confessed he had never been so emotionally destroyed by a role. Maria Schneider, who was only 19, felt betrayed by Bertolucci's manipulation and later disowned the film entirely. Behind the camera, chaos ruled. The film's set was tense and silent as Bertolucci pushed his cast into emotional collapse. Brando improvised scenes that blurred fiction and confession, pouring his real trauma into the character. Critics were divided. Some called it a masterpiece of human despair. Others called it moral rot. Its legacy is one of beauty and pain intertwined. Despite its infamy, it influenced generations of filmmakers to explore vulnerability without masks. Today, it stands as a warning that honesty in art can come at a devastating cost. Streaming it now feels like touching a ghost of a time when art risked everything to tell the truth. Number 13. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils remains one of the most shocking films ever made by a major studio. Adapted from Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun and John Whiting's play, it chronicled a true story from 17th century France where political paranoia and religious hysteria consumed a convent. Oliver Reed played the defiant Father Grandier, accused of witchcraft by the twisted ambitions of power. Warner Brothers financed it but quickly regretted it. The film was banned in several countries. The Vatican condemned it. Even critics who admired its courage were terrified by its imagery. Scenes of madness, plague, and human cruelty mirrored a world more political than sacred. Ken Russell said it was about the church's fear of truth, disguised as piety. The chaos behind the scenes matched the scandal on screen. Sets built like expressionist nightmares were torched in the climactic burning sequence. Vanessa Redgrave's performance as the deformed nun obsessed with Grandier became the talk of censorship boards across Europe. Many reels were cut and lost for decades. But history was kind. Rediscovered in later years, The Devils became a cult legend, the forbidden masterpiece whispered about in hushed tones. Watching it today, one can feel the weight of suppressed art roaring from every frame. It is not a horror film. It is a sermon of fire against hypocrisy and control, and its echoes are still heard wherever courage meets censorship. Number 12. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's final film is often described as the most disturbing act of rebellion ever captured on camera. Adapted loosely from the infamous work of the Marquis de Sade, it transposed the cruelty of the original into the final days of Mussolini's fascist Italy. Four powerful men imprison young captives in a secluded villa, turning power into ritualized horror. The film was banned in multiple countries. In Britain, it was denied release for years. In Italy, authorities seized every print. Even film festivals hesitated to screen it. Pasolini was murdered shortly before its premiere, deepening its mythic darkness. Some claimed he was silenced for political reasons. Others saw his death as an eerie reflection of the movie's despairing vision of humanity. Behind the camera, the experience was grueling. Pasolini demanded realism, forcing his cast to confront scenes of degradation that blurred fiction and truth. Crew members often walked off the set, unable to continue. Yet through its shocking surface lay his true intent, to expose fascism not as politics, but as a sickness of the human soul. Decades later, Salò remains one of the most banned and most studied films ever made. Critics now regard it as a political scream, a statement that evil thrives when obedience replaces empathy. Watching it today is like staring into history's darkest mirror and seeing that nothing has truly changed. Number 11. Straw Dogs, 1971. When Sam Peckinpah brought Straw Dogs to screens, it was meant to be a thriller. But what emerged was a moral explosion. Starring Dustin Hoffman as a mild mathematician pushed to primal violence, the film explored how civilization hides brutality beneath its polite surface. Critics were stunned by how far it went, and audiences were split between horror and fascination. Britain's censors nearly banned it. Some theaters refused to show it altogether. Newspapers called it depraved. Feminist groups protested its portrayal of cruelty. Yet Peckinpah insisted it was not exploitation, but reflection, a portrait of how violence lies dormant within us all until survival demands it. Behind the scenes, Hoffman clashed with Peckinpah over tone and realism. The director, known for his volatile temper, pushed his actors to emotional extremes, demanding authenticity over comfort. The result was chaos on set, but raw intensity on screen. Susan George was traumatized by the process, yet delivered one of the most unforgettable performances of her career. Decades later, Straw Dogs became a cult classic studied in film schools as both art and provocation. It predicted the collapse of masculine pride and the fragility of moral restraint. Watching it now is like witnessing a society tear off its mask and reveal what civilization really hides, the beast waiting patiently beneath calm faces. Number 10. Taxi Driver, 1976. Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver is more than a film. It is a fever dream of loneliness and rage burning inside New York's decaying heart. Robert De Niro, as Travis Bickle, became the voice of alienation, a man who cannot sleep, cannot connect, and decides to cleanse the streets through madness. The film's gritty realism felt too close to truth. When it premiered, audiences were shaken. Critics called it dangerous yet brilliant. Some politicians wanted it investigated for glorifying vigilantism. The climactic violence drew outrage across America, and the film was temporarily pulled from some theaters. But it also won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, cementing Scorsese as a visionary unafraid of society's rot. Behind the scenes, Scorsese battled low budgets and city restrictions. The crew shot mostly at night in actual crime-ridden streets. De Niro prepared by driving a New York taxi, for weeks blending into the very world the film condemned. Jodie Foster, only 12 years old at the time, was heavily monitored by welfare workers during production due to the story's disturbing themes. Taxi Driver's legacy never faded. It influenced generations of filmmakers from Fincher to Schrader and inspired countless debates about violence and isolation. Watching it today is like opening a wound that never truly healed. The streets still burn with the same anger. The mirror still asks the same question. Are you talking to me? Number 9. The Last Detail, 1973. Hal Ashby's. The Last Detail was a road movie like no other. It followed two Navy petty officers played by Jack Nicholson and Otis Young, escorting a naive sailor to prison. On the surface, it was a comedy about misfits, but beneath it beat a pulse of fury toward military hypocrisy and American obedience. When it premiered, critics praised its sharp dialogue and Nicholson's electric performance, yet many audiences were shocked by its raw language and its open rejection of patriotic heroism. The U.S. Navy condemned the film publicly and demanded its name be removed from all promotional materials. Several theaters refused to show it. Behind the scenes, the production was a quiet rebellion. Ashby, known for his anti-establishment streak, clashed with Columbia Pictures over censorship. Studio executives demanded softer dialogue and less cynicism. Ashby refused. He shot guerrilla-style scenes in real naval towns, sneaking footage without permission. Nicholson supported him fully, even turning down a pay raise to protect the movie's integrity. When it finally reached theaters, it polarized viewers. Some saw it as un-American, others saw it as a masterpiece of truth. Over time, its reputation only grew, inspiring later anti-authoritarian classics from Scorsese to Linklater. Watching it today feels like a time capsule of honesty when cinema dared to say what soldiers could not. That loyalty without conscience is just another form of prison. Number 8. Don't Look Now, 1973. Nicholas Roeg's Don't Look Now blended grief and horror into one haunting dream. Starring Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, it told of a couple mourning their dead child in a cold and decaying Venice where fate itself seemed to stalk them. It was beautiful, terrifying, and endlessly debated. Critics called it revolutionary for its fractured editing and eerie symbolism. Yet it also caused outrage. The British press called it obscene. Censors argued over its imagery, claiming it blurred lines between intimacy and death. Some countries trimmed it severely before allowing release. But the biggest controversy came from its intensity, an emotional nakedness that viewers were simply not ready for. The filming itself was as difficult as the film's tone. Roeg demanded total realism using Venice's fog and decay as natural metaphors. Crew members were chilled to the bone by the cold water scenes. Sutherland and Christie later said the emotional strain haunted them for years. When the film ended with its shocking twist, audiences gasped. It became a slow-burning legend whispered about by film students and critics who saw in it something deeper than horror, a portrait of grief consuming reality itself. Watching it today, one feels its icy fingers still reaching across time, reminding us that no loss ever truly fades, it only changes shape. Number 7. The Wicker Man, 1973. Robin Robin Hardy's. The Wicker Man was unlike any British film before it. Mixing folk music, pagan ritual, and detective mystery, it followed a devout policeman played by Edward Woodward investigating a missing girl on a remote island that hides dark traditions. It began as a modest thriller, but became a cinematic myth. When it premiered, the studio panicked. British Lion Films demanded cuts fearing public outrage over its pagan imagery. Many scenes vanished. Some reels were rumored to have been dumped in a field near the studio lot. Critics were confused, unsure if it was horror or satire. Audiences were stunned by its ending, one of the most unforgettable in film history. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. The film's budget was slashed mid-production. Weather ruined sets. Christopher Lee, who played Lord Summerisle, worked for free to keep the film alive. He later called it his favorite role ever, and spent years defending it when critics ignored it. The Wicker Man later resurfaced as a cult treasure. Restorations pieced together missing footage from old negatives. Its eerie songs and sunlit terror inspired generations from Ari Aster to Ben Wheatley. Watching it now feels like entering a ritual we are not meant to understand. A hymn to belief and fear, reminding us that civilization and superstition are often one and the same. Number 6. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Francis Ford. Coppola's Apocalypse Now was not just a film, it was an ordeal, a descent into the madness of war and filmmaking itself. Loosely based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, it transformed the Vietnam conflict into a fever dream, where morality drowned in smoke and jungle fire. Martin Sheen played Captain Willard, sent to kill a rogue colonel who had become a god in his own mind. The production became legendary for its chaos. Typhoons destroyed sets in the Philippines. Sheen suffered a heart attack mid-shoot. Marlon Brando arrived overweight and unprepared, forcing Coppola to improvise entire scenes in darkness to hide him. The director himself nearly lost his mind. He mortgaged his home to keep filming alive. Every day was a gamble with nature and sanity. When it premiered, critics were speechless. Some hailed it as a masterpiece, others as lunacy. The violence and surrealism shocked audiences who expected a war film, but got a hallucinatory apocalypse instead. It won the Palme d'Or, but left its creator broken. Coppola declared that the film was not about Vietnam, it was Vietnam. Today, Apocalypse Now stands as the ultimate symbol of cinematic obsession. Every frame breathes chaos, every sound hums with fear. Watching it now is like hearing the jungle whisper back that power and madness are the same thing, and that humanity always finds itself lost in the dark. Number 5. The Holy See Mountain, 1973. Alejandro Jodorowsky's The Holy Mountain was unlike anything that came before or after. Funded by John Lennon and produced by Alan Klein, it was a surreal explosion of mysticism, violence, and beauty. Jodorowsky played a Christ-like figure guiding disciples through a world ruled by greed and illusion. Every image looked painted by madness itself. When it premiered, audiences either walked out or fell into stunned silence. Censors in several countries banned it instantly. Religious groups called it heresy. Studios refused to distribute it, yet underground theaters made it a legend. Bootleg copies traveled across continents, turning it into a cinematic secret whispered among seekers and rebels. Behind the scenes, Jodorowsky demanded total devotion from his cast. Actors underwent weeks of spiritual rituals, fasting, meditation, even sensory deprivation. The director kept live animals on set, using them as living symbols in a universe without moral boundaries. The result was a film so shocking and visionary that even decades later, it feels like it came from another planet. Today, The Holy Mountain is revered as one of the most daring works of art ever put on screen. It predicted consumer culture's spiritual decay and mocked humanity's obsession with false gods. Watching it now feels like stepping into a dream you cannot wake from, one that asks the question, how much truth can we stand before we call it madness? Number 4. Network, 1976. Sidney Lumet's Network was prophetic thunder captured on celluloid. It told the story of Howard Beale, a fading news anchor who loses his mind on live television, shouting that he is mad as hell and not going to take it anymore. The speech became an anthem for a society choking on corporate greed and televised hysteria. The film's release sent shockwaves across America. Some networks threatened to ban its trailers, calling it an attack on journalism. Critics were stunned by its accuracy predicting reality television decades before it existed. Audiences saw themselves reflected in its cynical brilliance. The line between news and entertainment was already blurring, and Lumet saw it coming long before the rest of the world. Behind the camera, the tension was electric. Peter Finch, who played Beale, poured his soul into the role, collapsing from exhaustion during production. He died shortly after the film's release and was posthumously awarded the Oscar for Best Actor. Faye Dunaway's performance as the ruthless executive who turned tragedy into ratings, gold, cemented her as a symbol of ambition without empathy. Network remains one of the boldest critiques of media ever made. Every broadcast, every viral clip, every influencer echo feels like its prophecy fulfilled. Watching it now is like looking into a mirror we built ourselves and realizing that Howard Beale's madness was not insanity at all but vision. Number 3. Midnight Express, 1970. 8. Alan Parker's Midnight Express hit audiences like a punch to the gut. Based on the true story of Billy Hayes, an American student caught smuggling in Turkey, it turned a small act of recklessness into a descent through hell. The film was raw, merciless, and unforgettable. Critics called it a masterpiece masterpiece of fear. Others called it a crime against diplomacy. When it premiered in Cannes, the theater went silent. Governments protested. Turkey banned it outright, claiming it insulted their nation. The United States distanced itself from the controversy, while audiences worldwide packed theaters in horrified fascination. For many, it was the first time they saw imprisonment stripped of every illusion of justice. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. The cast endured grueling conditions in a real abandoned prison. Director Alan Parker clashed with producers over tone and brutality. Writer Oliver Stone rewrote the script repeatedly to capture Hayes' nightmare. Brad Davis gave everything he had to the role, and later admitted the emotional toll stayed with him for years. Midnight Express became a global shockwave. It won 2 Oscars and remains a warning about arrogance and survival. Watching it today still chills the blood, reminding us how fragile freedom really is, and how quickly the world can turn its back when the walls close in. Number 2, The Deer Hunter, 1978. Michael Ciminos. The Deer Hunter began as a film about friendship and ended as one of the most haunting portraits of trauma ever made. Starring Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and Meryl Streep, it followed a group of Pennsylvania steelworkers whose lives shattered after the Vietnam War. It was long, heavy, and daringly honest. When it premiered, it divided the world. Some called it patriotic, others called it propaganda. Vietnam veterans protested outside theaters. Several countries banned it for its unflinching portrayal of war's cruelty and moral confusion. Yet it won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, cementing its place in history. Filming was brutal. The Russian roulette scenes were so realistic that Walken later admitted he could not watch them again. De Niro performed his own dangerous stunts, including jumping from a helicopter into a river. The set became a battlefield of emotion, exhaustion, and authenticity. Over time, The Deer Hunter came to define how cinema could capture trauma. It was not about war itself, but about the silence that follows when men return home forever changed. Watching it today feels like standing at the edge of memory, where patriotism and despair whisper the same word, never again. Number 1, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975. Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was more than a movie. It was a rebellion disguised as fiction. Jack Nicholson's Randall McMurphy challenged an institution that looked eerily like society itself, and audiences saw themselves behind those walls. It, Esther, became an anthem of freedom against control. When it released, hospitals protested. Nurses' unions demanded bans. The Catholic Church condemned it for mocking authority. Some countries delayed its release, fearing it would inspire civil unrest. Yet, the more it was attacked, the stronger it became. The production itself was just as wild. Filmed in a real Oregon psychiatric hospital, Forman used actual patients as extras. Actors lived in character for weeks, blurring lines between performance and reality. Nicholson clashed with Forman, yet both men created lightning together. Louise Fletcher's icy calm as Nurse Ratched became one of the most feared performances in cinema history. The film swept the Oscars, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay, an achievement matched by only a handful of films in history. Its legacy lives on as a symbol of defiance. Watching it now feels like remembering the moment cinema itself broke free from the system that tried to tame it. The 1970s were not merely bold, they were fearless. Each of these films dared to tell truths that institutions tried to bury. They remind us that art is not comfort, it is confrontation. Which of these masterpieces still shakes you to your core? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe and keep the rebellion of cinema alive.